Shifting the focus of the drawing. This workshop drawing began on the left side with a discussion of the meeting area, but the group then wanted to discuss the relationship to the adjacent reception area. This required a shift from 1-point to 2-point perspective. Also note the annotated plans that are often added beside the perspective to clarify the relative positions of the objects. Such visual notes assist those who work in the next phases of design development. 8. Graphic vocabulary. Developing a graphic vocabulary. In a co-design workshop, the artists may be asked to draw almost anything at any time. Even if they have never seen anything like it before, they will have to produce a reasonable representation of it that will satisfy the participants in the group. A grand piano, a sailboat, a circus elephant, a spiral staircase, or a baroque fountain might be called up as easily as asking for a typical residential street scene. For this reason, the artist should constantly be observant of things around them and note how they might be quickly sketched. It can be a demanding task for an artist to be able to produce any image on command. It helps to have a graphic vocabulary to draw upon. This forms a mental storehouse of images that can be drawn quickly from memory and inserted into a perspective sketch as it is created with a workshop group. The following sections describe some of the representational images that should be stored in the artist's mind, since they are frequently asked for in a workshop setting. People, cars, foliage, outdoor furniture, glass, water, and a variety of materials. When a workshop participant asks for a particular environmental element, an artist must be able to translate that request quickly and convincingly into an image. Workshop experience has shown that some types of representational sketching are quicker and more convincing than others. Generally speaking, simplicity is important, so strive to discover the fewest possible lines that will suggest what the participant wishes to visualize. Having a set of mental images produced under a calmer, more controlled setting has the added benefit of increasing one's confidence in drawing for others. Figure drawing. As mentioned before, the co-design image always begins with a figure. For this reason, artists must have some confidence in their ability to render a convincing figure. The first few lines of the drawing must seem confidently drawn to the group members in order to garner their faith in the process that follows. The figure need not to be elaborate but should possess certain characteristics. For instance, the figure should be engaged in the activity that the group is considering, such as figure skating, bicycling, sitting on a park bench, or eating at a cafe. This involves some familiarity with anatomy and basic body proportions, starting with some basic rules of thumb on establishing correct proportions in a drawing. As figure drawing is so important to the co-design image, it is a good idea to begin a sketchbook in which to record observations about human body. Carry it in order to capture figures in sketch form and so begin building a graphic vocabulary. For the initial figure, a very simple representation is best as it allows viewers to fill in missing detail from their own imagination. Co-design figures draw attention away from the other environmental aspects that the drawing will explore. Figures are meant to draw the viewer into the sympathetic sympathetic relationship with the activity of the drawing and to provide a sense of scale. Body proportions based on the eye line of the figure. Eye line, shoulder, waist, elbow, pelvis, wrist, knee, foot. Eye height, 8 heads. Proportions of the body. Looking closely at the crowd of people, one observes that they have one thing in common. Every figure can be defined by parts: head, shoulder, arm, hand, waist, pelvis, knee, foot. The comparative size of each of these parts in relation to the whole body has a particular balance. The result is symmetrical beauty called proportion. Notice where the weight of the pelvis rests in relation to the eye and foot, the bend of the knee in relation to the leg, the bend of the elbow in relation to the line of the waist and the low-lying shoulder above, and the correspondence of the wrist and the crotch. Each of these parts is located in a particular relation to the next, and each one may serve as a reference or guide, allowing the artist to draw figures in various positions from the imagination. Heads. A sweep of the hand in a circular or oval shape quickly indicates head. The hairline position reveals the attitude of the head, whether it is looking up or down. If the head is drawn too small, correct it by adding hair from the line of the head outwards. If it is too large, add hair from the hairline inward. Difference in male and female representation are evident. Men generally may have heads with a more rounded look and squared-off chin atop a thick, muscular neck. The head of a woman typically takes a more oval or egg-like shape, with a more pointed chin and a slender, elongated neck. The subtle differences between these two forms will clarify the figures in the drawing. Remember when drawing necks that people are neither snakes nor storks. Avoid drawing the neck either absolutely vertical or extremely narrow. Observe carefully its gentle curve as it meets the top of the shoulder and imitate this in the drawing. Drawing heads. A. Hairline and eyeline indicate the attitude of the head. B. A small head is enlarged by adding hair to the top. C. A large head is made smaller by adding hair inward. Characteristic of heads. A. Male and female facial differences. Male, square chin and a wide neck. Female, pointed chin and slender neck. B. Observe the gentle curves of the neck. Stork, too wide. Snake, too thin. Human. Head and neck relationship. A. The adult stance and the stooped stance of the elderly. B. Important relationship among the chin, neck, and shoulder. C. Locating the main facial feature. Underside of chin lower than nape of neck. Base of neck lower in front than in back. Tip of ear in line with the eye. Bottom of chin in line with base of neck. A key to a convincing figure is the relationship between the head and the neck. Notice that heads do not sit directly on top of the shoulders, but rather push forward. Standard posture of the head on the shoulder reveals that the back of the head lies almost directly in line with the center of the body. In the elderly, the head often sags lower towards the chest and away from the center line of the body. The underside of the chin is lower than the nape of the neck. Note also that at the junction of the neck and shoulders, the neck is always lower in the front than in the back. A simple proportional system that approximates the position of the main facial features on an angle is useful to the artist trying to create a figure on the spot in a workshop. In this system, the face is first divided in half at the eye line and then into quarters to establish the location of the mouth. The upper tip of the ear is in line with the edge of the eyelid, and the base of the chin is in line with the spine where that enters the back of the neck. Arms and hands. Arms too are simplified in drawing for workshop. Once learned, the basic curves of the outline can be drawn with a couple of swift strokes. Usually closed, arms pose less of a problem than hands, for it's easier to draw the folds in the clothing than the naked arm. Although a small part of the figure, hands are important in representing action and mood. Careful study of hands in various positions is a necessary preliminary to the successful execution. Reduce them to the simplest components and represent them as mitts. Define the hand in 3 parts, 1 for the back and 2 for the joints of the fingers. Arms and hands. The arm can be quickly represented with a few flowing lines. B. Hands are drawn as simple mid-shapes. Legs and feet. The drawing of feet is similarly simplified to a triangular shape for the side view, a half circle for the front view, and a square for the top view. The most difficulty occurs in representing the feet in the correct relationship to the legs, particularly in an active figure. Observe real-life examples to acquire familiarity with these relationships. Legs and feet. A. Properly drawn legs add life and action to the drawing. B. Feet are simplified to basic triangular shapes. Clothing. The variety of clothing in a colored workshop drawing adds interest to a scene. The odd shirt may be given a plaid pattern or stripes. Men and women can be differentiated by clothing types. Clothing also enables the artist to develop a rhythm in figure drawing. Each creates in shoulders, elbows, and knees provide a pose for the hand and eye. The artist can check the drawing and prepare for the next stroke. Bent or dancing figure. These drawings demonstrate the method used in locating the divisions of the body. Dividing the body in half at the pelvis is the first step. The upper half is divided into 6 and the lower half into quarters. Note that these divisions remain constant in whatever position the figure is drawn. With this knowledge, the artist can construct figures in any imaginable position. The body will seem to move freely if the proportions are correct. Think of a puppet on a string. The working of all parts bring life and movement. A. Bent and dancing figures. A, B, C, D. The basic proportions are maintained in any position assumed by the body. Line of torso. The torso is the trunk of the human body that maintains a balance in walking, jogging, or running. It is always the center of equilibrium and it always distributes the weight of a body downwards to our feet along an invisible line of force through a center. If the lines of force are not carried downward through the center line, the body loses equilibrium and will topple from lack of balance. For instance, runners would fall forward if they did not keep their upper body central with each foot as it takes the brunt of the weight. Similarly, in drawing a figure engaged in an activity, the artist must think of this imaginary line of equilibrium in order for the figure to assume an appearance of balance. The line of torso remains centered upon an imaginary line of equilibrium so that the figure always assumes the appearance of balance. Crowd scene. Crowd scenes are called for frequently in workshop drawing. A pedestrian square or public hall needs to be filled quickly with the impression of lots of people. The trick is to draw a few carefully drawn figures in the foreground, then represent the people behind as a tangle of heads, bodies, and legs. The color is added to the front figures and spotted throughout the crowd to add liveliness and action. Indicating crowd scenes. A. Foreground figures are brought to focus by the background. B. Figure placement helps to define the space. The image is composed of overlapping planes of human activity. The relative size of the figures lends depth. The relative size of people lend depth to the drawing and define its space. Care in observing the common eye line will assist in overcoming the tendency to raise it to an unnatural position above the heads of the people in a scene. Distant figures require little detail. Portions of the lower body disappear from view when looking at figures at a higher level. Foreshortening of figures. Changes of level can be indicated by foreshortening body proportions. Looking up to a higher level, as in the case of a balcony, we see that the edge of the floor hides portions of the figures. The amount hidden indicates the relative distance of the figures. Note the line of the shoulder and the position of the head on the figures facing sideways. Looking down on the scene, body proportions are foreshortened and the range of vision is extended considerably. Crowds at a lower level are characterized by the lines of shoulder, the position of the head and feet, and the arrangement of figures in groups. The entire figure shortens, and the upper part of the body appears bigger than the lower part. The head appears as mostly hair, and the shoulders are prominent. Much is seen from the high-level view, and care is needed to align all of the objects, cars, and people within the field of view to the same ground plane. Children. Large heads, large stomach, and stubby limbs characterize the figures of children. If they are not asleep, they are likely to be moving quickly and so are a difficult subject to study through sketching. Concentrate on the study of one particular pose and sketch quickly as they assume that pose. This same technique applies to the study of figures in action. Learn one action at a time, waiting until the figure reappears in that position. Note the balance of the body and the center of gravity of the torso in relation to the position of the feet. Children. A. Children's heads are as large as adults, and they also have large stomachs and stubby limbs. B. Figures in action must maintain the line of equilibrium to appear balanced. Shadows. Shadows add an impression of bright sunlight. They can be used to great effect in enlivening a drawing and revealing the movements of walking by showing the shadow on the bent leg. Shadowed faces under hats and shadowed legs under the hem of a coat or skirt give the figure substance. The shadow of the figure cast upon the ground reveals the shape or form of the floor plane. Foliage. Perhaps one of the most common environmental features asked of the co-design artists in a workshop situation is the rendering of vegetation. From the depiction of an oak-lined residential street to an interior atrium space to a rural landscape viewed distantly through a window, foliage can play an important role in the creation of a convincing image. Render foliage. Artists often cringe when asked to render foliage, believing that it must be a time-consuming and laborious task to draw all of the leaves on a tree. Foliage need not be the daunting task that it appears to be. It can be fun. Use of shadows. A. Bold contrast in using shadows defines the shapes of figures. B. Shadows can be used to define surfaces and relationship between solid and void. Representing leaves. A. Individual leaf strokes. B. Combining strokes into groups after guptil. Tree planes. A. Reduce the planes of a tree to 3. B. Blend these planes together with leaf strokes after guptil. Artistic anatomy of trees. The first task of the artist is to become familiar with the anatomy of growing vegetation. Look carefully at surrounding trees, observing how they emerge from the ground, how the trunk diverges into smaller limbs, and how the branches support the clutches of leaves. It is natural to draw the tree as if it is growing, emerging from the ground up, forming its skeleton or branch structure, and then to clothe it in its leaves. The individual leaves will form larger groupings or masses of foliage. It is easier and more expedient to draw these larger masses than individual leaves. These groupings can be created by certain strokes of the pen combined to suggest volume. Practice these strokes that can be used to portray different species of tree: upward, downward, left, right, combined, pointed, radical, triangle, radial triangle, and linked triangle. An ancient Chinese brush stroke technique of drawing in alternating rhythms of 3 and 5 seems to relieve the tediousness of representing leaves. Reduce the planes of a tree or shrub to 3. Sunlit areas, a middle tone, and area areas in shadow. Shadows can be created by increasing the density of the pen strokes. Always add shadows in the natural nature of the material being represented. The final interpretation of the tree loses the stark contrast between the sunlit and shaded areas by adding a middle tone of leaf shapes. Remember that real trees have real problems such as a few dead limbs, uneven growth patterns, or gaps in the foliage cover that reveal the branches beneath. The inclusion of such details add an extra dimension to the drawing. A sense of animation can be achieved by rendering leaves in an unidirectional way, as if they are caught in the wind. The occasional leaf might be caught in mid-fall.